Alright, today we're going to take a look at Gigabyte's X79-UD5 motherboard. This of course, as the name would indicate, is an X79 motherboard. It's suitable for any of your LGA 2011 CPUs. It's going to run the new Core i7, and of course it's got some of Gigabyte's own functionality that they like to push out there, such as the 3D power, the 3D BIOS. To get a little bit deeper in detail on the 3D power, all that is 3 digital VRMs. One is going to run for your CPU, and you're going to have 2 separate ones, one for each bank of memory in the quad channel memory configuration. The 3D BIOS, that's going to be their version of the UEFI BIOS. It's kind of a 3D format. We'll get into that a little bit more detail later. Show you a video how that works and how it runs. There is a dual BIOS, so you can switch back and forth between 2 different BIOSes, one for performance, one for everyday use, however you want to set it up. Getting into the packaging, Gigabyte has gone for a very clean look this time instead of some of their older designs, which is a little bit more flashy. This is kind of stark. It's just plain white. It's got a very nice look to it. You have the 3D square on there, which of course relates into the 3D power and the 3D BIOS. You have some of your typical marketing material down here at the bottom. Of course, most of your X79 motherboards are going to come with the Bluetooth 4.0 plus the Wi-Fi module. That's been a big push for a while. We saw ASUS kind of build into that first with some of their platforms where they were throwing Bluetooth on there automatically. And then of course they built into adding Wi-Fi in with their Rampage 3 Black Edition. We're now seeing that across the line in almost all of the Intel boards that are coming out for the newer chipsets. We'll see that with Ivy Bridge as well. Flipping around to the back of the box, of course it's going to be a little bit more cluttered. You have a lot of marketing material to cram into this. You do have a nice picture of the board in the center, so you can take a look at that and then kind of wander around and look at everything else. And the majority of this here is just a reiteration of what's on the front with just a little bit of extra detail and of course the usual information that Gigabyte wants to put in. Your 333, 110 dB audio, and all of those. Again, we'll get into a lot of that in more detail as we take a look at the performance side of the board. Of course, opening it up, we're going to get to what you're here for. Right inside the box, the outer shell is going to be another box. It's become somewhat typical. As soon as you open it up, the first thing you're going to see is, of course, the motherboard. We'll take that and put it aside for now. We'll talk about that in much more detail later. Underneath the motherboard tray, you're going to find all of the accessories that Gigabyte has decided to throw in for you. Of course, you're going to have your usual drivers disc. You have an additional disc that is for your Wi-Fi module. You have additional information, several different languages to cover configuration of the Wi-Fi module. Your usual manuals, your startup guide, and of course there's an insert for some extra manual errata. Just some errors that were probably in the manual when it was first printed. Of course, you get a couple of stickers and your usual items. You do have a USB 3.0 front panel header, which is nice. This can also be converted if you have a case like the HAFX932. You can put this in the back. It's kind of a nice feature. You have your now somewhat compulsory 4 SATA cables. And then a couple of nice extra features here. And we'll get into those in just a minute. So taking a look at what we've got here, you can see that Gigabyte's thrown in quite a bit. You have a couple of SLI headers, one Crossfire header. This is for Tri-SLI, which of course is going to be standard on all of your Intel boards. You have multiple Crossfire bridges, which is going to allow you to run three-way Crossfire on this board as well. And then one of the biggest things is of course your Wi-Fi module. Here you have the Wi-Fi Bluetooth module. You can notice that this is pretty much the same thing that you would see if you were running in a laptop or in one of your smaller tablets. It's going to be a mini PCIe slot here. We'll run to PCIe 1. You also have a USB power header, an internal USB adapter, and then of course 2 antennas for your wireless in. This is also going to help control your Bluetooth module. The antennas in question, not exactly a fan of this style of antenna. They tend to sit out of the way, but they're still not exactly what you want. A lot of times the cables are not long enough for you to really get them out of the way. They end up sitting on top of your case. But there are 2 of them which allows you to get a little bit better wireless in performance, which we've talked about before. The more antennas you have, especially if they're multiple input, multiple output antennas, the better performance you're going to get there. Of course, you don't want to forget your cable. This cable is what allows you to connect directly to one of the USB headers and make sure you have proper power to the card. So that covers all of the fun stuff that's inside the box. The next thing we're going to do is we'll take a look at the Alright, continuing our look at the X79-UD5, we're going to take a look at some of the features that Gigabyte have put in here. The first thing that we noticed when we opened up the box, and we actually got a good look at the board, is that unlike the G1 Assassin 2, you actually have the full 8 banks of memory available for use here. This could be an indication that Gigabyte has tuned these correctly, or they don't expect you to push the memory as far as you would on the G1 Assassin 2. But whatever the case, you do have the availability for a full 8 sockets. It's going to give you a lot of options for RAM and makes this sort of more of a mainstream slash workstation board. Now, we are going to kick this off the same way we would walk it around if we were doing our photo walk around. So we're going to start off here at the top. You'll notice that they put in a nice power button here, kind of mimicking some of the other styles that are out there, but still it's a nice one. It's up at the top of the board, works well with a test bench, which for our purposes is great, and also is nice and clean and very visible. Moving down, you can see the typical 24-pin power adapter. Right behind that, it's not completely visible, but you can see that there actually is a 4-pin power, 4-pin fan header back here. That's going to let you plug in a fan if you want to use it for maybe cooling this bank of RAM. You can run dual coolers, there's enough room for it, but you might want to be careful because it's going to extend into some of the area for your CPU fan, as well as into the area where your 24-pin power adapter plugs in. Right next to it, right here in the space in between the power adapter and the SATA ports, you're going to see a front USB 3.0 header. That's going to be great for that one that they included in the box, so you're all set there. Moving around the board, you notice you have a CPU fan header, as well as your 8-pin auxiliary ATX power connector. Now this is in somewhat of a difficult position. I would highly recommend getting an adapter if you're going to install this in a smaller case. If you're installing it in a larger case, let's say a level 10 and HAF X79-UD5, you might have additional room, but I would still recommend getting one of those adapters. This can be difficult once you get it mounted to get that power connector in there. You'll notice the bank here. You have a nice little bank of power regulators, driver MOSFETs, and you also have the same thing here right next to your ferrite chokes. These are interesting in that they combine the MOSFET and the driver into one package. It allows you to save a lot of real estate on the board. But the downside is that they can get overheated, and they can build up heat inside, and they can actually break down a little bit quicker. Fortunately, most of the parts that Gigabyte tends to use are a little bit better quality, or good quality, so you shouldn't have too much of a problem there as long as you keep everything cool here. Right, flipping around and looking in between the second bank of RAM and the I/O panel, you'll notice that you have an additional set of chokes here, as well as power regulation. This is part of that 3D power that they talk about. This is the second bank, and of course you have one over here for the front bank of memory, and then you have your power regulation for the CPU. Now, moving around and taking a look at the peripheral slots, you of course have your 3 PCIe slots, 2 of which are going to be PCIe X16, and one is going to be PCIe X8. That's going to be your center one. So if you want to run SLI, just standard SLI or standard Crossfire, you're going to want to put your cards in slots 1 and 3, and when you want to go 3-way, you just load them all up. For whatever reason, perhaps for legacy, you do get a PCI 2.0 slot in here. That's going to be good for if you have an older video card, something along those lines. Just sort of fill in those gaps. Looking along the bottom, you do have some nice room for expansion. You have different USB headers. This is for front USB. This can also be used for front USB. You have a lot of, again, a lot of different audio options. You have a front audio header, which is all the way in the back. Personally, on this kind of board, I would like to see these get moved to the front, as the cable for the front audio is often not long enough to reach this, and you have to run it underneath the cards. It gets a little bit messy when you're trying to do cable management, again, unless you can get an adapter or an extension cable. So moving around, we take a look. The heatsink for the X79 chipset is actually a little bit larger. You have some nice surface area underneath here that will allow air to get underneath it and keep this a little bit cooler, which is definitely helpful in the long run. Taking a look again at the SATA ports. Gigabyte has offered you 4 of your G SATA ports. These are actually going to be SATA 3, so it's going to give you your full 6 gigabit per second. You have your traditional SATA 2, and you have some additional SATA 2 up here that are going to be off of your X79 chipset. And then, pretty much you end up with 10 SATA ports here. It's a nice extension, although I don't know anybody who's running a full 10 SATA drives yet. Flipping around to the back, you have a nice selection of I/O. You have 2 USB 3.0. Down here you have powered eSATA, but those are also USB 3.0, so they double as that. You have, of course, your LAN. You have your OC button, which allows you to turn OC on and off, and it also gives it a little bit extra boost. And then you have your BIOS switch, which allows you to switch back and forth between your dual BIOSes. They do include a Ps2 port one of the nice legacy features that they offer. And then of course all the extra red USB ports are just your standard USB 2.0. And then of course your regular 8-channel audio with optical out. They've kind of gotten away from the coaxial SPDIF. In fact, I haven't seen that on a board in quite a while. And that pretty much covers the basic design and features of the X79-UD5. We'll take a look at the BIOS in a little bit, and then we'll get right into performance and show you how it performs once it's on our test bench.